Hi, everybody. My name is Amelia Fontanelle, and I'm a curator at the Cary Graphic Arts Collection. Today, we're going to do something called a reproduction proof, which was a really common thing to do in the 1960s, 70s, and early 80s before a lot of classic typefaces were digitized. So this is the photo typesetting era. And if a typesetter or designer wanted to use a classic typeface, they often had to reach back to the letterpress world where the types were already manufactured. So they would ask a letterpress printer to set the type they wanted into a reproduction proof. So the best kind of printing in terms of kiss impression, so you get a very crisp image around the type. And then that reproduction proof would be photographed and then imaged onto an offset lithographic plate. So taking into account all of that, what we are going to do is the perfect storm of letterpress printing. And of course, letterpress is this wonderful dance of variables. So the first variable is the ink, what kind of ink you're printing with, what are the qualities of it. Second variable is the paper. What's the thickness of the paper? What's the texture of the paper? What's it made out of? Third variable is what printing press are you printing on? Are we printing on a cylinder press, a hand press, a patent press, an automatic feeding press? Fourth variable is what kind of type or printing matrix. Are we printing photographic halftone reproductions? Or are we printing type or wood type? And the last is the humans. The humans are the variable, like who's the printer? Who are they doing? What are they making decisions about in their letterpress printing experience? So I'm going to explain all of these different variables as we go through this reproduction printing process. The ink that we are going to use, and typical ink that I use in the press room here at the Cary Graphic Arts Collection, is I like to use a rubber-based ink. Today we're using Vanson Holland's rubber-based black. One of the things about a rubber-based ink is that it has pigment, but the vehicle is a synthetic. So it has the quality that it stays open on the press for a long time, meaning that it doesn't dry very quickly. And that's good because we are going to do several runs today, and I want the press to be, the ink to be wet during the entire duration of our printing. Putting the ink knife into the glob of ink here, and you see that it has these threads here. So that means to me that for our purposes, we want the ink to be very stiff instead of loose. Right now, the ink is too loose and these threads are too long. We want the threads to be very short and tacky. That means I have to add some material to the ink to make it more viscous or more stiff. And the reason for that is that in letterpress, we want the ink to get on the type and then be offset onto the paper in impression. We don't want any kind of squeeze that is going to actually mar the edges of the type. So there would be, if we looked at it with a loop, the type that if it was printed right now, the ink would kind of slash out around the edges, even minusculely, but it wouldn't be a true impression of that particular type. I am going to add an additive to the ink to change the viscosity. And the additive that's very common in printmaking circles and in commercial printing is a material known as magnesium carbonate. So it is a common tool that you find. You can buy it from any book supplier's warehouse. And I'm just going to place some of that magnesium into my ink. And, you know, there's really no point of no return, because if I feel like I've become too viscous, then I can always add more ink and change the viscosity back to be more loose. But the process is just mixing that together. And we'll do this for a while until I feel that it's mixed appropriately and that when we do that pull, it shortens the length of that thread there. A shorter thread there, that means the ink is a little less viscous, more tacky, and we should see it cling to the type and then be printed without a haloing or squeeze effect on that type. For our reproduction proof, we want to use paper that is a bit contrary to what we typically use in the letterpress press room. For instance, a lot of people like the feel of the contrast of a bite impression into an uncoated paper for letterpress. And so this is a piece of typical house cardstock that we use in letterpress, of course, changing the packing so that we get just a fine bite so you can tell that it is a letterpress process. We're not doing that today. We're actually striving for the opposite of a bite impression or a debox into the paper. We're striving for an absolute kiss impression where there's almost no deboxing on the back of the paper. And the paper I like to use is a coated stock. I have like a stash of old paper. This is called Rayon reproduction proof paper. And so it has kind of a blue background, and then it has a nice coating on the white background here. So we're going to be printing on the white side. This is a little bit more than a typical sheet of copier paper. Copier paper is about 20 pounds per ream, 20-pound weight. This is like an 80-pound test that we're going to go with for our proofs today. So you're going to use the Vandercook Universal 1 cylinder press. And the wonderful thing about this press, of course, is that it has an adjustable bed, so I can adjust that very finely in terms of thousandths of an inch for the printing type that we're going to use. And it also has the automatic tower, which prints the paper and then recuts it back to the keyboard. The type that we are printing today, metal printers type, foundry type. This type has been set by Leah Rosen under the art direction of Shani Avni. And this is the David Hebrew typeface, and it has been cast by Jerusalem Type Foundry. Now you'll see that this is a very standard type specimen. We actually wanted to print, instead of just one character from each letter in the alphabet, we wanted to proof the entire set because we want to see if there's any kind of damage for all of the characters, if there's any wrong sorts in the wrong places. The other thing you'll notice is that with the type, we also have these brass bars. These are type high bearers. So the height of these is 0.918 inches. And this is going to help balance the rollers as we print so that, even though a Vandercook is such a precision machine and you should be able to get really good proofs on that machine, I'm not taking any chances. I really want the rollers to be completely balanced to type high so that there's no change at all in terms of where the roller is hitting the type. I want to make sure that all of the variables are controlled in the inking and impression. The ink is distributing through the press fairly well. I still see some globs, but what we're going to do is take a moment to set the form rollers to the appropriate height for this job. So again, the variables, right? We have changed our ink, we have our type here, but we need to make sure that the ink is actually being distributed to that form or the area that we're printing on the press in a very even manner. And so the two rubber form rollers underneath the press here, they could be off kilter a little bit. So what I'm going to do is set those rollers to the equal heights. So I'm going to shut the guard on the Vandercook, and I'm going to go into a process called trip because I don't want to print on the impression cylinder, and going to move the press forward. And I need to back it up a little bit because I want those rollers to be in an area that I can get to them while they're underneath the plate, the bed plate of the press. So this is a Vandercook roller setting gauge. Other people make them. But you see it says 0.918 on the top there. So what I'm going to do is we're going to do the back rollers first. You come in like this, and as soon as I clear the front roller, I'm going to turn it on its side so that I can actually feel friction of the roller. And then a little stripe appears on the roller, and then I can see the left side of the roller. We're going to do the same thing to the right side. So I come in, and what I'm doing is comparing the width of that stripe to each other. So I can see that the stripe here is thinner than the stripe on the other side, and that was the left side is thinner. That means that the roller is raised higher than this side. So I would prefer it to be this height. So I'm going to lower that roller on that one side. And it just takes a couple turns there of the roller setting gauge. And then we'll do the test one more time. So I did change the height. I lowered it a little bit. Let's see if it's fairly even. Yeah, I think that's a good match there between the two sides. And then we have to do it again. Do it again on the front roller. However, the roller is not sitting under the bent plate, so I gotta back it up a little bit. And that is much too low. Much too low indeed on both sides. So the ink distributed through the press, I set the rollers so that it's a little bit less than an 1/8 inch of a stripe on the two sides. So for the two form rollers. So I feel good about those two variables. The next thing that I looked at is I put the press in trick, meaning that it would not print on the impression cylinder. And I see very clearly that everything is getting inked on the form, which is a good sign because sometimes you roll the press across and there might be some pieces that are not getting inked at all. So I do see, and here's a little test, that they are definitely getting ink on that type. So that's great. And I did the trip a couple times because I want to see what the saturation of the ink is on one of our first proofs here. The other thing that I did in the meantime was I set the tapes for the tower here. Now, the tapes are dangerous. I always say that to students because if you do not set your tapes correctly, which hold the paper onto the impression cylinder, you actually run the risk of crushing your type because the type will come in contact with the tape as it wraps around the impression cylinder. So you really have to be super careful that these tapes are well out of the way and in the margins of your paper. We have printed proofs that I think are the best we are going to get in terms of the reproduction quality of these proofs. We have learned that just from printing this, it is actually, the type is not type high, and it perhaps has not been cast to the highest standards because we're seeing a lot of variation in the characters, and that's okay. This is information that helps us understand how the type is manufactured or the kind of life it's lived. Perhaps it was damaged in its previous life with a different printer. But this is, I think, the best we're going to get in terms of we're having a really beautiful kiss impression on our print, and also there is a minimum ink squeeze around the characters. And the way that we determine that is that we get a loop in there and we actually are magnifying the images of each letter. So just to reiterate, so our goal in printing these for reproduction proofs is to get the best possible print that is not over inked, that is a kiss impression, and that is fairly even for all of the characters. But what we always have to remember is that printing is such an iterative process, and that one of the early impressions that we got, even though we're checking every single detail, as you can see, is not perfect. We're finding that the characters are so uneven. However, the Latin characters here are printing fairly okay at this point early in the game. So then that's causing us to start to think that this type is actually different heights to paper. So it's not all 0.918 inches high. And that's to be expected because it was cast in a different country than the United States with different standards. So moving on from this early proof, we make some more adjustments. After I raised the bed of the Vandercook incrementally, and also I cleaned this type using mineral spirits and a soft horsehair brush. We see that it's cleaning up a little, but we're seeing by the time we get to the 5th impression, we're seeing that some of these characters are just not competing with others in terms of being characters that are adequate impression. Like, that is unacceptable. You can't really read that very easily at all in comparison with one of its counterparts here. So that's telling me that something happened to these characters and it's making them print differently, because all of the other iterations of the ink, the paper, the impression, the press, and the human, they're all the same for those characters. So where we circled on this proof, what we did was we added selective packing on the impression cylinder because I knew these characters were less than type high, and so I had to do some correction in order to get them to be the same height to paper or the same impression strength as the other characters. And then finally, we come to, this is what we're considering our finished proof, and it's as good as it's going to get. We have a very, very light kiss impression, and you can see that the characters are fairly even all throughout. We do have some that, and it's just the proclivities of this type. You know, it's almost 60 years old. So, so this type has had sometimes a hard life, but we've corrected between those ones that were under type height, and we've kind of gotten them to be the best printing they can be by making a human call to get them to be printed evenly with the others.